On this edition of the Just in Time podcast with Justin Kutcher.
They show the Tyree catch, the place erupts. So many media members were rooting against the Patriots, rooting against Belichick, that all those media members that were in that journalism post Super Bowl NFL banquet, this huge cheer went up when they showed it again. Mike Reese, my partner, and I were sitting there just pushing our food around like, maximum amount of work, minimum amount of payoff. Super Bowl 42 was tough. When the Patriots lost the perfect season to the New York Giants, that one was one that, as both a journalist and a fan, I wanted really, really badly, and I was crushed after they lost that game. That was devastating. Don't forget, when they traded for Randy Moss, at the time, they gave up a fourth-round pick. The word on the street at that time was, Randy Moss is cooked. Randy Moss doesn't have much left. The Patriots are kind of taking a chance here, bringing in Randy Moss. People thought at that time, or the prevailing wisdom was, his best days are behind him. And so there was sort of a question there as to whether Randy just wasn't as motivated playing for the then Oakland Raiders, or whether he actually, at that point, was fried. Obviously, covering Brady was incredible. I mean, just the stuff that he did, it's hard for people to believe, but just like a very down-to-earth guy, definitely raised the right way by his family, would always look you right in the eye. Ray Allen's obviously up there too, but I'm going to say Steven Gostkowski, the kicker for the Patriots.
The greatest sports moments happen in seconds, but the stories behind them are timeless. Dive into the mind of the icons who lived those moments. No filters, just authentic conversations about the moments that define careers. I'm Justin Kutcher, and this is the Just in Time podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Just in Time podcast with Justin Kutcher, joined now by a guy who's been a columnist for the Boston Globe sports section since 2009. He was my original radio co-host at WTBU at Boston University, one of my best friends in life, the pride of Lynn, Massachusetts. Everyone knows him as Christopher L. Gasper. I know him as Gasper. Gasper, dude, awesome to see you.
Hey, Justin, thanks for having me. It's always great to see you, man. And I enjoy this podcast, so it's cool to be on as a guest.
Well, it's an honor for me to have you on as a guest because our days go back a long time. I mean,
we're old. We got old, man.
You took the words out of my mouth. I feel like we're still in college, and yet here we are. We're 20 plus years into our careers. Like, I don't know how that happened.
It's true. And sometimes I look back and I honestly can't believe it when I start to think about things that I did, like while I was in college, working at the Globe as like a editorial assistant gopher. And I think about things that I was working on when I was there. Like, for example, the night Mike Mussina almost no-hit the Red Sox at Fenway Park.
You mean almost perfect game?
Almost
Carl
perfect
Everett?
Game. Carl Everett. Yep. Doesn't believe in dinosaurs, but believes in breaking up perfect games. And I was working there that night and like trying to put together a graphic and stuff for them. And that feels like yesterday. And now I talk to those same college kids who are in that role, and they look at me like I'm 100 years old.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't even born for that game, which is, that's what I say. It's so scary when you talk to college kids, and I talk about the Subway Series in 2000. I'm like, oh, you weren't even alive. This is brutal. So we're gonna turn the page and not reflect on that stuff, on how old we are now, but instead go back, because for you growing up in Massachusetts, you're a diehard Boston fan. So
I am. Yep.
Which was the first team that was your true love?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one of my earliest sports memories, I'll say, was the Red Sox. And the 1986 World Series. My dad actually woke me up, because I was young at that point. I was probably about 6, 7. And my dad woke me up, because he's like, hey, you got to see this. The Red Sox are going to win the World Series. So that was sort of my indoctrination to being a Boston sports fan, was Bill Buckner, Mookie Wilson, Ray Knight crossing the plate, all of that. But the team that I probably fell in love with first, honestly, was the Celtics. That was the team that I think, fell in love with first. And I think one year I dressed up as, you're a kid, you don't know the difference or whatever. So one year for like Halloween, I went as like Danny Ainge.
Really?
I just had a number
Nice,
44
Danny
jersey.
Ainge.
Yeah, I had a number 44 jersey, and I was like, basketball. And I was like, I'm Danny Ainge. So definitely those 80s era Celtics, obviously the big three, Bird, McHale, Parrish, love DJ, Dennis Johnson, those guys. Danny Ainge was on that team. In fact, I still have a pennant from the first basketball game my dad ever took me to. That is a pennant that's a Celtics one that says 1986 World Champions, and it lists every player on the team, including guys like Scott Wedman, and it lists, Casey Jones as the coach and Red Auerbach as the GM. I still have that pennant.
That's awesome. See, that's what, again, for people who are tuning in right now, Gasper and I, there's a reason why we're best friends, because you have that. I have stuff that I, went to my first games with. I still have tickets for that. You'll appreciate this, from 1994. Yankees Rangers, August.
Oh, wow.
Never happened.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
The strike.
Yes. Yeah.
And I kept those tickets.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. The strike was terrible, but
strike was terrible.
That's like really cool that you still have those tickets. Yeah, I mean, we used to go, like, not to go on a tangent, but even on our vacations, when I was a kid, we would build some of those vacations around going to sports things. So a couple summers in a row, we weren't a big flying family, so we drove up to Toronto, stayed in Mississauga, and this was like the height of the Blue Jays and Sky Dome. So it's like, John Olerud chasing 400, and that's we went to games at Sky Dome, and they weren't even games that involved the Red Sox. It was
right.
I wanted to go. I was like, Dad, I want to go to Sky Dome, and we would, now Rogers Center, and we would go, and we did that 2 summers in a row. Built another vacation around going to Chicago, so we could go to Michael Jordan's Steakhouse and that stuff. So this is part of what we used to build. I used to make my family build vacations around this stuff. In fact, in my household to this day with my sister, who's not really a sports fan, the way she says sports, she says it like a swear word because she hated it so much. Because she'd be like, Mom, Chris is watching sports again. And even to this day, when she says sports, she says it like she's saying like the F word or the S word or something like that, because it's like, I was so into it,
Yes, I do know. I know the feeling quite well. It's funny. I mean, you're known as the golden child in your family, and it makes sense when I think about it. Lynn, Massachusetts, Harry Aganis, the Golden Greek. So the Golden Greek and the Golden Child, all from Lynn, Massachusetts. It's all coming full circle. But I need to know this, because athletes have dreams, right? Yeah. When you're growing up, you and me, we want to be professional athletes. At what point for you did it turn and think, you know what? Maybe I want to be a journalist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, honestly, growing up, there's things that you remember, things that you like when I was growing up, playing basketball, I was like, I want to be Kenny Anderson. I love Kenny Anderson. He was at Georgia Tech and got drafted by the Nets. And I was like, I want to be Kenny Anderson. Then I got into high school and I realized, I'm not going to be Kenny Anderson. But I always had a passion for reading and writing, which is something I get from my mom, who always has been really into the arts, really into literature, very talented artist. She would paint and draw. When I was a kid and I first went to school, she would send me to school with my lunchbox. She would draw all these like characters and stuff, like Voltron characters, He-Man characters. And she really inspired my love of the arts and my love of reading and literature. So I was thinking at that time, like, all right, I'm not going to be Kenny Anderson, obviously, but how can I stay in sports? Because I'm very passionate about sports. And it was being a sports journalist, being a writer was something I thought about. I think for a lot of us who showed up at BU around the time you and I did, that was also like the height of Sports Center. That was when you had Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann and Rich Eisen and the late, great Stuart Scott. So there was that element of it to me when I got to college. I was like, oh, maybe I want to be an anchor and be on ESPN. But yeah, pretty much, I wasn't as good a high school athlete as you, elite hand-eye that you have. I didn't have that capability between basketball and track. So I knew if I wanted to stay in sports that I was going to have to find another avenue, and just being able to talk about sports or write about sports seemed really, really natural to me.
Well, I go back to those days at WTBU, and I'll never forget it. And I know we've talked about this a lot. We would end every show with a final thought, and we'd go around the horn and everybody would have a final thought, which is also ironic because I got the idea from the sports reporters, and Christopher L. Gasper has been on the sports reporters back when it was the real sports reporters.
Shout out Bill Roden, who always treated me really well. He was great, fantastic.
I
Yep.
love that. And so there was one final thought that you did about Paul Pierce when Paul Pierce got stabbed, I believe it was. And you talked about the player and the playa. And dude, this is now 20 plus years ago. And I still remember it. And at that moment, I was like, oh, Gasper's different. Like his use of the English language is different than all of us. And you stood out and you became a columnist for the website for us. What was the first byline that you had in the Boston Globe?
Oh, that's such a great question. So before I actually worked for the Globe, let me run it back just a little bit. Before I worked for the Globe, so Chris Daly, who had worked for the Washington Post and was one of the great journalism professors I had among many great journalism professors at BU, he actually got me a job in the summer of, I'm going to date myself here, 99, working at the Boston Herald. And so my first journalism job was at the Boston Herald, and it actually was in news, not sports. And so I bring this up because one of the first bylines I had a front page story, and I still have it framed. My parents framed it for me. There was a guy who lived in Boston, older African-American gentleman who had played in the Negro Leagues.
Oh.
And I was able to track him down and do a phone interview with him, and he was great. And they put it on the front page on like a Saturday or something like that. And so that was my first byline ever, really. Before that, I was just writing obituaries and stuff, but that was my first byline, which was really, really great. The first
and
one
it's front page.
Yeah, it was front page, which was amazing.
Okay, above the fold?
No, below the fold.
Okay.
But you got to remember the Herald's a tabloid.
Yeah, I know, that's
like
true.
A lot of the area, gets taken up by the logo, but no, below the fold. I'm trying to remember what my first one was for the Globe. I can't even remember, honestly. It was probably like some high school sports story.
That's what I remember. I remember you doing high school sports when we were still in college and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But the reason I asked about what was your first team was because when you started covering these teams now for the Boston Globe, how do you separate the fandom from the journalist?
Yeah, it's challenging. And I'll say this, honestly, as I look back on my career, Justin, it's a little bit like a father or mother coaching their child. At times, I probably have like overcompensated. Like you're always a little harder on your kid because you want to act like you're not showing favoritism. So at times, I probably overcompensated. But what I've learned over the years is there's just this ability to sort of emotionally divorce yourself from what's happening in the moment and while you're writing. And then maybe later on, you can sort of go back and look at it, a little bit more, feel the emotion a little bit more as a fan, kind of like I am right now after the Celtics for the first time in franchise history blew a 3-1 lead, losing the 76ers. But it's been a couple of days, right? Initially, your thoughts are kind of journalism mode in terms of like, what are the stories and, what are the things I should be writing about, focusing on what are fans, you still think like a fan from the standpoint of, as a fan, what would I be interested in? But you can't show that sort of favoritism. There's only like been a few times in my career where it's been really, really hard.
All right, give me those times.
Super Bowl 42. Super Bowl 42 was tough. When the Patriots lost the perfect season to the New York Giants. That one was one that, as both a journalist and a fan, I wanted really, really badly, and I was crushed after they lost that game. It's funny. I knew we're going to get in some stories, but the way it works for people that don't know, if you're a beat writer, you're writing a game story, you have to file something called running, and you're filing in pieces. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's like putting a puzzle together, but backwards. So after the first half, you'll write a bunch of copy, send it in, something after the third quarter. And what goes on top is the thing that you write last. So for Super Bowl 42, Glendale, Arizona, as that's happening, as David Tyree is coming down with that catch, I have two leads going at the same time. One they win, one they lose. And on my laptop, I still have the winning lead. If they had won, I still have that on my laptop because I had to write two. And as soon as the final seconds tick off, you have to send, the running so they can get it in. And, Yeah, that was devastating. Super Bowl 42. There's like a video of me somewhere on the Globe website. It's a funny story because Jackie MacMullan and Dan Shaughnessy were there. And that was one of those moments too. I had to pinch myself. I'm like, what am I doing sitting between these two? Like, what?
Legends.
Yeah, someone has to lift me up out of here because I'm not supposed to be here. And after the game, they were supposed to do this video, and the game ended, and it was such a crazy ending that no one expected that they just kind of forgot and went back to. In those days, the NFL used to have this big dinner they do for us after the Super Bowl, this big like banquet. So they just went on the bus and got to that. So they asked me to do it. And it's me, the confetti's around. It's literally like my Edward R. Murrow, like this is bombed out London moment. You know, it's me being like, this is Glendale, where the Patriots have blown. And you could just see on my face that I am like crushed. So that's definitely, I'll tell you a quick story about that Super Bowl too, which was funny. Harvey Green, who used to be a PR person for the Yankees, and then he worked for the boss, George Steinbrenner. Then he went to the Dolphins. So when I first started covering the Patriots, he was the PR guy for the Dolphins. Legendary guy, one of the nicest people you ever meet. One of the last people that used not 8.5 by 11 paper, but the like longer, like 11 by.
Yes.
He would always use that for everything. So during that Super Bowl, he turns to Dan Shaughnessy. I'm sorry, Shaughnessy turns to him and goes, I think we have a problem here. And Harvey goes, yeah, man, this is close. Like, I don't know if your team's going to pull it out. And Dan goes, oh, no, it's not that. We have a beat writer who's never written a losing game story, which was true. It was my first year as a beat writer. They'd won every game. I had never written a losing game story until that game. And they had won 18 straight games. So I had never had to write a losing game story as the beat writer. I had covered the team the year before as the backup, but I wasn't writing the game stories. So I had never had to write a losing game story until Super Bowl 42.
That's insane. I did not know that part of it.
Yeah.
I knew you were the beat writer for that year. And okay, so when the Tyree catch happens, there's a rule. There's no cheering in the press box.
Yeah.
You just said before that your sister to this day says sports as if she's saying fuck.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So when Tyree makes that catch, there's no cheering in the press box. What are you doing?
Oh man, I'm typing away. So true story. And I can honestly say this. I did not see the Tyree catch live. I had to catch the replay because I had the two leads going. I had the two leads going. And honestly, true story. I had put sort of, if you remember, like Jarvis Green had kind of broken in on Eli. So I thought they kind of had him wrapped up.
Yes.
So I look down to type, and then all of a sudden I hear something, and I'm like, what the? And they're spotting the ball. And I'm like, what happened? So I have to like look up at the screen to see that play. And then obviously, Plaxico Burress beats Ellis Hobbs, who, a lot of people didn't know. I actually broke that story after, not right after Super Bowl, but about a week after that. Ellis was playing with a torn groin. So if you have a torn groin, what's the one thing you can't do? The Patriots, Belichick called this. Dean Pease, the defensive coordinator, had to take the heat for it, but it was Belichick called what we call a zero blitz. So it was all out. They came all out blitz. It's man-to-man coverage on the receivers. There's no safety in the middle of the field. Plaxico Burress runs a sluggo, slant and go. So if you're a cornerback with a torn groin, what is the one thing you can't do?
You can't turn. You can't
change direction quickly.
Right.
And so it was over at that moment. So I actually ended up breaking that story afterwards, talking to Ellis that he had been playing with that, and nobody knew that at the time. But I didn't see the Tyree thing live. The other thing that's funny about the Tyree thing is I mentioned that the NFL used to do this really cool sort of after the game, like banquet, dinner for all the media members. You're talking about not cheering, obviously. So in those days, they had these big like screens, not TV screens, but like the pull down screens and projection.
The projection. Yeah.
And they were showing the game. And this is all media members. And I finally get there and they're re-showing the game. It's kind of like in the fourth quarter, and I'm pushing my food around the plate because this is like a disaster, and they show the Tyree catch. The place erupts. So many media members were rooting against the Patriots, rooting against Belichick, that all those media members that were in that journalism, that media member post Super Bowl NFL banquet, this huge cheer went up when they showed it again. Yeah. And I'm sitting there like Mike Reese, my partner, and I were sitting there just pushing our food around like, maximum amount of work, minimum amount of payoff.
All right. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask, what was the lead if they win?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I haven't looked at it. in a little while. So honestly, I should have gone back and looked at that before
Okay.
we came on the air. But I vaguely, it had something to do with being perfect, basically. Basically something along the lines of it wasn't a perfect performance, but they ended up perfect, something like that. When I say the lead, it was literally
Right.
like, you write what's called a top. So it was basically like 3 or 4 paragraphs. It was the lead and like 3 or 4 paragraphs. Basically, those other paragraphs were about them holding off the Giants, staving off the Giants, which obviously they didn't. And yeah, I've kept that one. I've had multiple work laptops since then. And I always make sure that I transfer the file that has that in it over so I can go back and look at it. I remember my lead, my actual lead for when I lost was something like the team that was, deified as perfect failed when it mattered most, or proved mortal. The team that was deified proved mortal when it mattered most, or something. Was the lead when they actually lost. And my boss was there. And I remember he read my lead right away as we were going down to the locker room. And he was like, good lead. And I was like, okay.
and I know this
Yeah.
because of our friendship, but if they win that game, you might not just be a columnist that you are now, but you might be a published author as well.
Yeah, I had a book deal in the works riding on that season if they had been able to complete it, and obviously they didn't. So I would have been able to say, hey, I'm a beat writer, one of the few beat writers, just the ones that year that cover that team. I mean, people forget that, yes, you had the 1972 Dolphins and they did it and they went all the way through, but that was a 14-game regular season.
Correct.
And including the Super Bowl, they won 17 games total. When the NFL switched to the 16-game schedule in 78, from that time until they ended up switching to the 17-game schedule, there was only one team that went undefeated in the regular season, and that was that 2017. So no team had ever won 16 straight games. No team had ever won 18 straight games because,
Right.
again, the Dolphins only won 17. And it's just so funny to me, even here, if you talk about that 2017, people talk about it's like a dirty word. People, that team, that one loss, that one final drive, not only changed history, but really changed the perception of that entire team. They go from being the greatest team of all time to a team that people around here don't even want to talk about. For a little while, they had a banner in the stadium up for the 16-0 regular season. They took it down, because people complained. They hated it. They had the Super Bowl banners. They thought it was a loser banner. So, as you know, this is what I say. And maybe I'm a little biased because I covered the team. But you're very familiar. Everybody listening, watching is familiar with football. How many times do you see a team like, say, the 2012 Ravens? Team gets hot at the end of the year. They go on, they win a Super Bowl. That happens like all the time. That 16-0 happened one time in the history of the NFL. And to me, it's just a little bit of a shame that it doesn't get, yes, they didn't finish it, but that it doesn't get appreciated. Because to be honest, that accomplishment, the 16-0, while it's not as meaningful, it's harder statistically and logically than just winning the Super Bowl.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, to go 16-0, yeah, there's a team that wins the Super Bowl every year. There's no team that has ever gone 16-0 other than that Patriots team. There are a couple of things that I want to touch on.
Yeah,
one, you talked about having two leads.
Yeah.
2004 ALCS, Game 4, the Yankees are about to sweep the Red Sox, right?
Yes.
And I was doing official stats for Fox, and I'm standing in the press box overlooking Jay Mariotti. And Mariotti has his entire column. He's writing his column, I think, for the Chicago Sun-Times at the time. And it's all about, the Yankees and George Steinbrenner and this and that. And the minute that Bill Miller gets the hit, he just hits delete.
Yeah.
And I will never, ever forget that. Just being right there. And he had this whole thing written, and I was like kind of reading it as he was writing it because I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I'm doing my work, but I'm seeing this. And then, boom, delete. I'm like, oh my gosh. So unlike you, he wasn't having a competing lead. He had to start from scratch right then.
Yeah, that's brutal. And that's, columnists tend to do that. When you're the beat writer, because you have to file so quickly, and they do too, to a degree. And I know I've talked to Shaughnessy. That's definitely happened to him before. Hey, you know what? I mean, I can tell you that happened to me, and it was in a good way. But Super Bowl 52, I had a call, yeah, because they're down 28-3, and you're like, okay, this didn't work out. Brady's worst performance in a Super Bowl. All this delete. It's like for me, I deleted everything when Dante Hightower forced the strip sack.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember to this day, like tweeting I deleted everything and I sent out a real quick tweet at that point, game on, exclamation point. And that was it. Like it was, and at that, having covered the Patriots for that long, the rest of it wasn't a surprise to me. But once Hightower got that strip sack, I was like, oh, yeah, delete this.
I mean, think about this. You've been at these events,
Yeah.
covering them. So as a kid growing up, you're reading the columns of some of the people that you've mentioned, the Shaughnessy, the Bob Bryant, the Jackie MacMullan. Now you're the one that people at home are reading. Maybe not in the actual newspaper, but at least online. Does that ever cross your mind when you're covering these events? Like, oh my gosh, like people might be reading me, like I might have like an impact on them.
It doesn't, because I just, first of all, I never think of myself as being on their level. And I was I ended up, I hesitate to say the word replace, but Bob Ryan retired after the
Mhm.
2012 Summer Olympics. And I had already been a columnist for the Globe, but it was mostly online. And then once he retired, I sort of became more of a full-time newspaper columnist. And I remember I was introduced at something by Shaughnessy, and he's like, here's Chris Gasper. He's the next Bob Bryant. And I just cringed. I was like, no, there's only one Bob Bryant. And I always say to Bob, it's like what Magic Johnson said to Larry Bird on his retirement night, Larry Bird retirement night. Magic got up and said, there will never, ever, 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 ever be another Larry Bird. There will never, ever, ever, ever be another Bob Bryant. So I don't think of myself in those terms. It's interesting working for the Globe. I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in Boston, and there are stories that have been written. Kevin Armstrong did a great story for Sports Illustrated just about the history of the Boston Globe sports department. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, I'll be generous and put it in your terms. It's like playing for the Yankees. I was going to say it's like playing for the Celtics, but I'll put it in your terms. It's like playing for the Yankees. There's all
Yeah.
these
Legends.
greats, these legends,
Hall of Famers.
Hall of Famers, Ray Fitzgerald, Peter Gammons. Growing up, just quickly, my brother and I, we would laugh when Diamond Notes would come on ESPN, not because it wasn't good, but because we had already read it on Sunday in the Boston Globe. Peter had already published all that stuff in the Globe on Sunday. And Bud Collins, the legendary tennis writer, John Powers, legendary Olympics writer. I mentioned, Jackie MacMullan, Peter May. I mean, I could go on. Fran Rosa, who covered hockey, Kevin Paul DuPont, who's maybe my favorite writer at the Globe. So all these people that were so legendary, I never think of myself in those terms. It's kind of like if you're, I wonder, it'd almost be like asking, Aaron Judge, do you put yourself in the same category as Mickey Mantle? He's probably like, no.
Right.
It's like, no, that's Mickey Mantle. It's the same for me. It's like, no, that's Bob Ryan. That's like here. So it is. I feel very fortunate. And I will say that reading the Globe, growing up, it was really inspiring and sort of the hallmark of the Globe sports section. It's not just the great coverage, but the Globe is known. It's a writer's paper.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability to experiment and expound on things and try and write sports in a way that is almost poetic when you have that ability to do that and that time to do that. We're not sort of just straight up AP style. And so I really appreciate that. And I wonder if I grew up somewhere else, if I would have ended up doing what I'm doing. As much as I love sports, I don't know if I would have been inspired in the same way.
Well, it's for me, one of the coolest things, obviously growing up in Connecticut outside New York City, I would get the New York Times. My parents would get the New York Times. And so I'd always read the sports section. But I always knew about the Boston Globe and I knew about the columnists. And there is that black and white, picture.
The stencils, yeah.
Yes. So when you first saw your own stencil
Yeah.
in the paper, what did you do? Like, what did
Great
it feel
point.
like?
Surreal. It definitely felt surreal. And by that time, we had kind of moved from the stencils to things that were more color, like a digital avatar. So I don't know if I ever had a straight up black and white stencil, but it was kind of weird. I'll tell just a quick story. I do remember like Kara Henderson, who worked for NFL Network. I remember her saying she saw my stencil one time and she goes, "Man, that makes you look a lot more buff than you really are." I was like, "Thanks, Kara. Appreciate that." She laughed, and I was like, "Yeah, I guess you're probably right, because I'm not a big guy." So that's what I remember about it. But yeah, it was kind of surreal. You look at it and you think, is that me? What? It's just weird. It's weird. I don't really even now. It's a little strange to
And
kind of
then to
think about
follow
it.
that up,
Yeah.
like, it's like a Hall of Fame bust, right? Like, does it actually look like you? Were you happy with what it looked like?
So it's funny. I left the Globe for a couple of years to go do TV in Boston. I had always wanted to try full-time TV. I was a reporter anchor at the local ABC here, WCVB, which has been the number one station in town for a long, long time. Got to work with the great Duke Castiglione, who was in New York for a long time at Fox 5. He was awesome. But when I came back, they asked me if I wanted a different stencil because my digital avatar, my old digital avatar, no beard, and I'd had the beard for a while, and I said I did. And so they did a new one. And I'll be honest, they did the new one. And I was like, oh, that makes me look kind of old and tired. And my old boss, the person who hired me, Joe Sullivan, the day they ran the new avatar, sent me a text that said, "You got old."
You're like, take it down. Go to the
Yeah.
old one.
The one I have now, I have to be honest, I don't love. I love my job, but I don't love that one. But the original one was pretty good.
All right, let's go back to that 2006 Patriots team. 06 to '07, the
Yeah.
perfection. Randy Moss came to the Patriots that offseason. When was the first time that you saw Moss and Brady kind of click?
Yeah, there was a moment early in training camp. And one of the things people forget about that year is that Randy, I believe it was a hamstring. He kind of tweaked his hamstring really early in training camp. But there was one training camp practice where, Brady just reared back and launched a deep ball to him and he got behind everybody and, caught it. And it was like, ooh, that's because people forget when they traded for Randy Moss at the time, and they gave up a fourth round pick. The word on the street at that time was Randy Moss he's cooked. Randy Moss doesn't have much left. The Patriots are kind of taking a chance here, bringing in Randy Moss. People thought at that time, or the prevailing wisdom was, his best days are behind him. And so there was sort of a question there as to whether Randy just wasn't as motivated playing for the then Oakland Raiders or
Mhm.
whether he actually at that point, was fried. And he didn't spend a lot of time in training camp because of that injury. He tweaked that hamstring, and then they kind of shut him down. We didn't see him like the rest of training camp. In fact, there were discussions at that point about, is Randy Moss going to make the team? That was like
What?
sort of part of the yes, that was part of the media discussion at that time. Will Randy Moss make this team? Because we haven't seen him out there in training camp, and he's been kind of injury prone. And I remember, I was close with this guy passed away. I was close with like Riche Caldwell, and Riche had kind of been their number one receiver the year before. And a lot of people didn't think he'd make the team, and Riche ended up making the team. Well, what ended up happening, and Riche told me after the fact, they only had him make the team so that they could practice that first week against the Jets because Randy wasn't ready, and they weren't sure Randy was going to be able to play. And they ended up cutting Riche pretty quickly. In fact, I think they cut him during that week and Randy was able to practice, but we still had no idea what to expect. And then there's that first game against the Jets, which honestly goes down as the Spygate, game in terms of where the Patriots got caught. But he gets deep, he gets behind Revis, he gets behind two Jets defenders, and then he does this for the first time. That's the first time we saw this, the separation celebration. And so that was like, it was like, oh, this guy's different. The way he just ran right past them that first game against the Jets. So we go from being like, hey, is Randy even going to like stick around, like make it through the whole year? Can he stay healthy? To, wow, Randy Moss looks like he and Brady are going to do something really, really special. And as you know, that season started in the Meadowlands against the Jets, and the regular season ended in the Meadowlands against the Giants with the record touchdown pass was the record at the time, and then obviously the 23rd receiving touchdown for Randy Moss, which is a record.
When, since you had covered or been around, did you talk to Brady about having somebody like Randy Moss? Because up until then, he never really had a stud receiver. You know, you think about the greats. I mean, he's always compared to Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning had Marvin Harrison and then Reggie Wayne. Brady didn't. And all of a sudden, when he got a stud receiver, they go out and have a record-setting year. So when did you talk to him about what's it like now having somebody like Randy?
Yeah, a little bit that year, and then like a little bit, sort of after that year as Tom went on in his career. The interesting thing about that team and what happened there, and you have to give Bill Belichick credit, is that '07 team, especially offensively, was a response to what happened in '06. Tom and Deion Branch were really, really close. And Deion Branch was a very clutch receiver. Deion Branch has a Super Bowl MVP. So looking at that, it was crushing. I first started covering the team. One of the first stories I had to write when I switched over from what I was doing, which at that time was sort of like high school stuff for the Globe, and I got promoted to the main Globe sports department.
That's just slightly different, high school.
Slightly different, yeah. Like literally like a week before the season starts. But one of the first stories I had to write, and I believe it was like the day after the season opener that year, which was against the Buffalo Bills. In fact, a quick story: the very first snap of the '06 season, Takeo Spikes got the ball from Brady for a fumble. It was the first offensive snap for the Patriots. Wow. It was an inauspicious start. But they ended up trading Deion. He'd been in a contract stalemate. He wanted a new contract, and they didn't want to give it to him. They ended up trading him to the Seahawks. And so that whole '06 season, it felt like they were chasing it at wide receiver. Benjamin Watson at tight end was kind of the number one. Caldwell emerged. They made a acquisition of Jabbar Gaffney, and they end up losing. They blow that 21-3 lead at the old RCA Dome against the Colts and Peyton Manning. And so Belichick's reaction to that offseason was, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to go and get weapons. So before they even got Randy, they went out and signed Wes Welker, who was a restricted free agent, and they put a poison pill in it. And basically the league made the Dolphins and Patriots play nice, so it became a trade. They signed Dante Stallworth. Running back, they had signed Sammy Morris. They went out and tried to, and Randy was kind of like the icing on the cake. And that was the whole idea, that '07 team, was to give Tom the opportunity, because up to that point, people were looked at it sort of, okay, yeah, Tom's a winner, but he has Belichick as his coach, obviously, in these great defenses. Tom's the winner and Peyton Manning's the stats guy. And that season, Tom showed, like, if you give me the weapons, I can be the stats guy too. And I think that was something, not that individual numbers are important to Tom, because they're not. And as someone at his camp once said to me when we were talking about contracts and numbers and stuff, he said, there's no place in the Hall of Fame for, best contract. That's not what Tom's interested in. That's like not what his legacy is about. But I do still think the competitor that he is, it meant something to him to be able to show, hey, you guys all think like Peyton can do this and I can't. I can do this. I can do if you give me the weapons and you give me the chance and you give me the offense, I can do this too, and I can do it just as well as him.
So that whole season, covering them,
yeah.
When did you first start to think, maybe it could be perfect?
That's a great question. Maybe when they destroyed the then Washington Redskins and Joe Gibbs at home, and they just absolutely annihilated them. And London Fletcher, who was their linebacker, and
one of my buddies,
so London had played. You should ask London about this, because he had played at John Carroll with Josh McDaniels. John Carroll, Division III school.
Yeah.
Don Shula's alma mater. It's sort of like this cradle of coaches. They had played together, and the Patriots kind of ran up the score on them. I think they scored like 52 points, and London had something to say to Josh like after that game. And I remember thinking, like, if teams are, and I remember also Belichick saying after that game, well, what did they want us to do at the end? Kick a field goal? Like, that would have been worse than to keep going and scoring. Because at one point, the Patriots went for it on 4th and whatever. And remember, this also kind of became a revenge tour because of Spygate. Like,
right.
Bill was mad. The team was mad. So they had this real like FU attitude. So not only were they good, but they wanted to like annihilate people. And so after that game, Bill's like, what do they want us to do? Kick a field goal. And I don't know if it was London or somebody else in the Washington locker room. I went and asked them, like, what should they have done at the end of that game? And whoever it was like, kick a field goal. And I remember thinking, like, they're mad about them running up the score and basically saying they should kick a field goal. This team's different. The other one was they ended up playing the Cowboys. That was a big early season game. Tony Romo and the Cowboys. It might have been, I think both teams were like 6-0 or something at the old Texas Stadium.
Okay.
And Tim Cowlinshaw, the legendary columnist for the Dallas Morning News, he called it the duel at the dump. And it was a huge game. And the Patriots ended up running away. And this little used fullback from Navy, Kyle Eckel, ended up scoring at the end of the game. You know, Bill was kind of really sticking it to him and running it up. And I also remember thinking, man, the Cowboys are pretty good. Like, they have a lot of talent. You know, they had T.O. That was a get your popcorn ready game.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this Cowboys team is loaded. And the Patriots just wiped the field with them. This could be like a really special team, and they're highly motivated. And that was such a strange year too, just because they were so hated because of the Spygate thing. I remember being in Cincinnati, walking the stadium that year, and the Patriots team bus went by, and these Cincinnati fans were throwing stuff at the bus, and they go, "Fuck you, Belichick, you fucking cheater," you know. And it was like crazy how much they hated the Patriots. I mean, that team was on like a hate tour the whole season. Everywhere we went, everywhere, you know, people would have like the little cameras, like styrofoam, like camera stuff. They say signs, Belichick. It was all this stuff. So that team, not only was that team really good, but that team was hated. And then, you know, the Queen song, Another One Bites the Dust.
Yeah.
That became the anthem that they would play in the locker room after every game. So Teddy Bruschi, that became the anthem that they played after every game. So again, they'd kind of rub it in. So after every game, you go into that locker room and they'd be playing Another One Bites the Dust. Yeah, that whole
That's fantastic.
year. Yeah.
Which makes it all the more crazy because I'm sure you know, but Antonio Pierce is the one who said to the Giants, we're wearing all black on the flight to the Super Bowl because we're going to the funeral of the undefeated season. And just like all those different things intertwining, you covered that game at the Meadowlands that the Patriots won. But the Giants played a good game against
They played
them.
a great game. They played a great game.
When they were set to have the rematch in the Super Bowl, as a fan and as somebody who had seen all these games, were you confident that the Pats were going to pull it out?
I was overly confident, Justin. Let me tell you a story. Oh, yeah. And look, I remember I took the train down to New York, New Jersey for that final game. And I remember reading some of the New York papers at the time. And the whole thing was like, the Giants have nothing to gain from this last game. Should they rest guys? It was Tom Coughlin going to rest guys. And Coughlin, who had coached with Belichick at the Giants, was like, no, we're not going to rest guys. So it was a little risky for the Giants that last game of the regular season to go all out the way they did. But it obviously ended up working out for them. But I remember being in Arizona at that Super Bowl, and most of my week obviously was spent with the Patriots. And one quick thing that I think gets forgotten about the Patriots and that whole thing is that Tom Brady had pretty badly hurt his ankle in the AFC Championship game against the Chargers. And so he was dating Giselle, and like the New York tabloids had caught him with like a walking boot on in Soho and all this stuff. So there was a lot of intrigue about that going into that week. So I spent the majority of my time obviously at the Patriots, but I was able to sneak away to the Giants, and they were at this kind of like ranch setup. I forget exactly where it was. And I remember walking in with Burt Breer, who is one of my good friends. Albert Breer. Yep, Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. I remember walking in with him, and no lie, it's one of the stupidest things I've ever said. I turned to him and I was like, this just feels like the losing team media availability. Yeah. I said it, right? I was like, this just feels like the losing team media availability. This is the losing team's hotel.
And what did Bert say?
He just laughed. You know, again, people really didn't think. I mean, it's one of the great upsets really in sports history. I think we look back with the benefit of hindsight and say, well, you know, the way they played him in that last game and all that. But I think the feeling was at the time that the Patriots had sort of already taken the Giants' best shot. I'm not sure we fully grasped just how hurt Brady was in that game. You know, one of the things I always say about the game, if you go back and watch it, one of the great skills Tom Brady had, a la Dan Marino, is while he wasn't elusive, he was a master of moving in the pocket, subtle, a step left, a step right. He was a sitting duck in that game. There were multiple sacks where he just turtled the moment they broke in. And obviously the Giants did a great job. It was a great Steve Spagnuolo, who is a Massachusetts guy, Springfield College, masterful, one of the greatest game plans in the history of the NFL. But Tom just kind of turtled. He couldn't move. Right. And the Giants figured that out pretty early, and they just kept bringing the heat, moving guys, reducing guys like Strahan inside to rush against Logan Mankins. But I was very confident that week that the Patriots were going to win that game. Very confident.
I was working with somebody in New York City, and when the first line came out, I believe it was a 14-point spread, Patriots to win by 14. I said to my buddy, who's a big gambler, I go, take the Giants. He goes, take the Giants with the points. I go, the Giants are going to win.
Wow.
And he goes, so you're saying take the Giants straight up? I said, the Giants are going to win. He made $30,000.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I'm never, ever
paying. Great.
I'm never paying for a dinner with you again. Now, granted, he had the balls to go gamble on it, but something to me was like the Giants are going to win. And the reason why I thought so was because I saw what their front four could do, and they can get to Brady. I didn't know about the ankle issue. It's funny how, again, like you're the Boston mass guy. You've seen these. You are uber confident. I'm the New York guy. You always said I was uber confident, and to see the different perspectives and how they would play out. It's one of the funny things, for you and me. I remember texting you after the Red Sox won in 2004. First, when they came back to win, it was brutal for me, but I knew they were winning the World Series. Once they beat the Yankees, like that was their World Series.
You're right.
And I remember texting you saying, congratulations. Hope you don't get another one for another 86 years. And lo and behold, the Red Sox become like the team of the decade and all this stuff. It's so weird because you mentioned earlier how your dad woke you up for 86 Game 6. And you were a Celtics fan. The Celtics had won an NBA final. Other than that, like Boston was a city that was losing like every year, and heartache after heartache after heartache. When the Patriots won, it was huge. When the Red Sox won, all hell broke loose. But ever since the Patriots won, Boston's become a winning town. So how weird is it to go from being a perennial heartache to a perennial contender, and you're covering those contenders?
Yeah, it is. You raised that point. I mean, for most of my childhood, like you said, I mean, there was that title in '86, and then the next championship was '01, and I had already graduated from college at that point, and I still remember I was watching that game in Alston with some of my BU friends who were still in school. They were in a master's program, and when Vinatieri kicked that ball, like my heart stopped for a second, and it was just I like blacked out. It's like, and I couldn't believe it. And then when it went through, I was like, oh my God, they won. We won. I think I said we won, because I was still,
of course,
in fan mode. I was like, we won. I never could have imagined. And I've written this a couple of times, Tom Brady was kind of you've heard the old thing, the face that launched 1,000 boats. He was kind of the face that, launched 12 championships. His emergence that year, and he wasn't fully developed Tom Brady that year, but the team goes on to win. He obviously has the drive. John Madden, the late, great John Madden, is saying they should just kneel on it and go to overtime. Mm-hmm. But Brady has that methodical, very Brady-like drive to get them in field goal range. That changed everything in Boston sports. It changed the karma. It changed people's attitudes. You went to Boston University. I think that New Englanders, Bostonians by nature, are sort of fatalist. They're kind of curmudgeonly. Like we're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. There's a lot of, it's kind of gallows humor, right? There's a lot of gallows humor to being a New Englander. And that kind of changed it where it's like, wow, good things can happen to us. And then from there, I think when the Patriots won, it ratcheted up the pressure on all the other organizations to be able to, and then especially when the Red Sox won afterwards with John Henry, it was like, okay, now these two are winning. And that really put the pressure on all the other organizations to push and try and pursue and be a championship. People always ask me, what kind of sports town is Boston? If you're in Washington, it's a football town. It's about the Redskins, now the Commanders. If you're in St. Louis, obviously it's a baseball town. Pittsburgh it's the Steelers. And they would always ask me, and I'd say, well, probably the Red Sox. But you want to know the truth? It's a winner's town. It's a winner's town. In the 70s, it was, well, no, but whoever's winning is the most popular, is what I mean. That's what I mean.
Gotcha.
No, whoever's winning, because in the 70s, there's a lot of hockey fans here that always have, but when in the 70s, it was Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito. The Bruins were number one. In the 80s, it was Larry Bird and the Celtics because they were winning. In those early 2000s, it was the Patriots so whoever has the star and is winning the championships, like, yes, there's always going to be a natural gravitation to the Red Sox. But if you look at over time, like who's the number one team in town, a lot of times it is the franchise that has the preeminent star and is competing for championships on a regular basis.
So you're saying that what Tom Brady did, not just for the Patriots, but for the city of Boston, was he transformed the mentality into becoming, we can do this, we're winners now. So you weren't yet covering them. Like you said, you were at, in Alston with your BU buddies watching. Red Sox, you're a professional.
Yeah.
Celtics, you're a professional. Bruins, you're a professional. What was your reaction when each of those teams won as a professional versus as a fan?
Yeah, so 04, I was still mostly doing high school stuff. So that was still more like a fan. I mentioned that story about my dad. I mean, I could have been in the city watching it with all my friends. I'll tell you just a quick aside before I answer the question. After the brutal game 3 that the Red Sox lose to the Yankees, and Bronson Arroyo starts that game. What was the final score? Do you remember?
It was like 19-8. I think.
Yeah,
like
they got
19-18.
That's right. It was 19-8,
yeah.
19-18. That's right. I watched that with my friend Brett, like in Boston at a bar, and I've never heard the streets so quiet after. People were so quiet because what you have to understand about the 04 season, if you weren't here, is when the Red Sox lose in 03 to the Yankees, Boone hits the home run off Wakefield. People were devastated and despondent the next day, but the attitude was, okay, let's go. We want the season to start right now. So that whole 04 season is basically a continuation of 03. And it's like, here's this moment. They get back against the Yankees, and now they're going to get swept. So it was so incredibly quiet. Anyways, when the Red Sox won in 04, because it became clear they were going to beat the Cardinals, I wanted to be with my dad. So I watched that with my dad at my parents' house because it was kind of like a makeup for 86. So there was that one. So the first one I covered where a team won a championship where I was a professional was actually the 2008 Celtics against the Lakers. And that was awesome. I remember at halftime, I think it was game 4, I called my family from then Staples Center because it was still one of those moments where I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm covering a Celtics-Lakers NBA Finals. It was incredible. And there's only been a few times in my career where I really sort of dropped my professionalism. And I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, but after the Celtics won game 6, they blow out Kobe and the Lakers at the Garden. We're in the locker room afterwards. We're getting doused with champagne and getting doused with beer. I high-fived PJ Brown. Not very professional, but I was pretty excited. And he got high fives from a bunch of media members, and I was one of them. You're getting doused with the beer. And so that was an awesome experience. Just like the first time you're covering a championship. And that's probably the one that had the lines blurred the most between professional and fan. I was very, very, very happy to see them win. I really like covering that team with Doc and KG. Obviously, Ray Allen, one of the classiest guys you'll ever meet. Paul Pierce, Rondo was still young. Kendrick Perkins, who's doing a great job on TV, and Perk was great back then. And they brought PJ in like halfway through as the veteran guy. And, PJ hit that big jumper in the Cleveland series, and he was just the nicest guy in the world. And yeah, it's just one of those moments where high fives are flying, and it's like, why not? Just high five PJ Brown in the locker room after they won the title.
What about getting doused with champagne and beer?
Yeah, that was. I mean,
And you're big in your clothes. Like
exactly.
I know you love your clothes. So are you going like, no, not this? I love this outfit.
I purposely wore a suit that I knew I could part with. It was an older suit, one of my like Men's Warehouse suits. No disrespect to Men's Warehouse, but
No, I like the way you look. They guarantee it.
Yeah, exactly. It was one I'd had since college. I purposely wore that, and I did try and dry clean it after, but it died. So I was prepared. You know, it's like you got to wear some clothes you don't mind losing. You have to make sure you bring in a plastic bag for your notebook so that whatever you're writing down, it doesn't get all smudged. So I had the little Ziploc plastic bag for my notebook, you know, so I had to put that down for a second to high five PJ.
And you had to jump.
Yeah, totally. Well, you know, he lowered it a little. He came down a little, and I sort of extended. You know, I don't have great wingspan, as Jay Billis would say, but you know, between him coming down and me going up, it was, yeah, we met at the I met him at the apex there. So
Well, as KG said, like anything is possible.
yeah,
You know. So with anything being possible,
yeah,
we have to let all the people watching and listening in on this. The Kobe versus Michael debate that you and I used to always have.
yes,
Right?
yes.
And you said something that I'm going to give you a ton of credit for.
Okay,
If Kobe came first, people would always be comparing Michael to Kobe, and would it be enough? Would it be good enough? And I thought to myself, that's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate thought. Michael 6-0 in NBA Finals.
Yeah.
He wins. But beyond that, you loved Kobe Bryant.
I did.
So now you're covering an NBA Finals, watching Kobe against the Celtics. Like, are you watching him as a fan? Are you like, what are you doing?
Oh, it's a great question. I will say, you know, again, you're trying to be neutral as a journalist, so that definitely helps. But the fan part of me was rooting for the Celtics. But you're right. I mean, that we've had that Kobe, and look, Jordan obviously better than Kobe. My whole thing is just Kobe not really sort of getting, I felt the credit that I felt he deserved for the career that he had, and for the way that I give him a lot of credit for the way he tried to chase down Jordan, sort of a la Tiger and Jack Nicklaus, right? So obviously Tiger's not going to get there for a million reasons,
Right.
but Kobe never like shied away from. Now, look, there were times Kobe maybe wouldn't admit how much he was sort of, and this used to make you mad, how much he imitated Mike, like the way he talked and the way he would not admit that, but he didn't really back away from the fact that like, hey, this is the greatest and I'm trying to go after it. But for that series, it was less about, and it's just ironic when you think about it in terms of the Celtics-Lakers connections and Kobe, because one, Paul Pierce, who was MVP of that series, grew up in Inglewood, California, a huge Lakers fan, going to Lakers games. And now he's carrying the banner for the Celtics, right? So that's going on. Right now, Jason Tatum, who's the best player on this, he's a huge Kobe fan, like huge. Like Kobe's like his guy. So these sort of little connections. And then also what I remember is Kobe's draft year, the Celtics, and we've seen these photos, but I remember as a fan reading these stories, like, and I had read about Kobe at the time. I used to get this like, you know, basketball magazine that all these like high school basketball prospects. I was really into it. And I knew about Kobe and Lower Merion, and I wanted the Celtics to get him so badly. And I was so excited when they brought him in for the workout. And there's those famous pictures of him in the Celtics gear for the workout. So there's just a million connections there sort of with Kobe. But in that series, it didn't really register in that way in terms of the whole, you know, Kobe debate. And that Celtics team was such a wagon that year. It was a 66 win team. Everything just clicked. They were so good that it would have felt really hollow if they did not, at the end of the day, end up winning the championship. You know, the one that was,
like the Patriots that didn't win.
Yeah, it would have felt hollow like that, no question. And it's the funny thing about that thing is I was coming off the Patriots when I ended up covering we had buyouts basically at the Globe. So then they were like, well, we need you to go with the great Mark Spears, who now works for Anscape. They needed me to go with Mark and cover the Celtics. So I ended up covering them in the playoffs as kind of like a co-beat writer. And so I went throughout that whole run. I was writing the notebooks and doing all that stuff. And that was great. That was like a great time to cover it. But it just felt for the Celtics, it would have felt so incomplete if they didn't win that. And it didn't occur to me as much about sort of Kobe's legacy. And just quickly in 2010, when the teams met again, Kobe basically lied to us the whole series because we kept asking him, everybody kept asking him about, Celtics Lakers, you're a student of the game. What does it mean to you? And he's like, oh, just another series, just another NBA Finals. I want to win a championship. And then finally, I remember afterwards being in the bowels of the Staples Center, and they asked him the question, and he just kind of smiled that Kobe smile. He's like, yeah, of course. I fucking lied to you guys. Of course I knew what it meant. I wanted to win because it was the Celtics. Yeah, he's like, I fucking lied to you guys. So that was great. Yeah.
When you asked Kobe a question for the first time,
yep.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was. I'm not going to lie. I was because I was like, this is somebody that you kind of, we were born the same year. And as you mentioned, a big fan of his game. And yeah, I definitely was a little nervous the first time I asked him a question.
What was the question?
Oh, God, I don't even remember. I think I blanked out. You're just in one of those big scrums. I do remember one year later in my career, I asked him a question. It was about a jumper he hit over Ray Allen. And he just kind of looked at me and smiled and, sorry about this, Ray. But he's like, at this point in our careers, my elevator goes to here, Ray's goes to here. Yeah. And he just kind of smiled and, that Kobe smile and that little mischievous smile when he's like trash talking. Because it was like a jumper. I was like, hey, that shot, Ray, was like right on you. How did you know you had enough airspace to get that shot off? And then at this point, my elevator goes to here, Ray's goes to here.
That's a good line.
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, so Ray Allen, you talk about trash talk, Kevin Garnett. When
Yeah.
Kevin Garnett got to the Celtics, what did you see change? I know you said you came in late to that team to cover them, but what did he bring that flipped that team?
Obviously, the defensive presence and just the intensity. Kevin Garnett's probably one of the most intense athletes I've ever covered. Probably one of the most intimidating athletes I've ever. I mean, he could just stare a hole through you. Corey Dillon was a guy like that. I mean, Corey Dillon, you kind of you like feared for your life with Corey Dillon. I mean, but Kevin wasn't like that. But he was just so intense. In fact, I remember there was one time. So Kevin famously would not talk before games. And this was back in the day in the NBA when it was like way more common. It wasn't just you get the guys at the shoot around. You could get them at shoot around, and then you could get them in the locker room before the game. The locker room's open. And you could get most guys. In fact, Ray was awesome. Like you could sit and have a 20-minute conversation with Ray at his locker. But Kevin famously didn't talk before games to the point that Jackie MacMullan, who is a legend. I mean, Jackie is top of the top when it comes to basketball writers. One time went to go talk to him and he just like blew her off, and she had to say something, basically along the lines of like, come on, Kevin, like, if you don't want to talk to me, but like, don't treat me like that.
Right.
But he was just so intense with everybody. And so that level of intensity he imparted on all his teammates. And I think even some of those guys were sort of afraid of him. In fact, I think, you had Brendan Hayward on the podcast, right?
Yep.
And he does some of these, like, I don't know if you've seen these
tall
videos.
Tales.
Yeah, the tall tales. And the one about Perk. Have you seen that one about Kendrick Perkins, where he and Perk were really close? And Perk was they were playing a game, and Perk's like, shit talking him and won't like, and basically like, I'll see you after the game in the locker room. And so from this tall tales, Brendan's like, what's going on with this? And he's like, all right, I'll see you afterwards, basically in the hallway. And then Perk's like, oh man, I'm so sorry. But Kevin doesn't like us like fraternizing with the other team. So, that's the way it was. Like he just took their intensity and their competitiveness to a whole other level. And the funny thing about that team from a Celtics standpoint is, I remember, I think it was Bob Ryan wrote, people sort of doubted that team would be good. Like Bob wrote, he thought they'd win like 44 games or something. And the feeling at the time was that the Celtics had missed out because they hadn't gotten the first pick in the lottery. The ping pong balls hadn't bounced their way. And they end up getting Jeff Green and drafting him and trading him to Seattle for Ray. And Paul was already there. And the year before, I'd covered the Celtics a little bit in 06, 07. They kind of had me do like an audition for a couple of weeks. And the Celtics had this horrible losing streak, which they broke on Valentine's Day. I think they lost like, I don't know, it was like 18 in a row or something. And Paul got hurt. And Paul told Jackie, I'm paraphrasing. Basically, I'm the classic case of a great player on a bad team. So it was like Paul kind of wanted out. They didn't win the lottery. It was like, this is Danny's plan B is trade for Ray Allen and then try and get Kevin Garnett. Is this going to work? And obviously it worked fantastically.
They were the original big three. I mean, that was the first time that they made a move, and obviously other teams tried to follow, but they were successful right away with that team. And I think a lot of basketball fans were happy because Kevin Garnett finally got the chance to get the ring, and that he was the leader of that team. And, Paul Pierce was the face for the Celtics, but, Kevin Garnett going there, it was different. And you talk about Ray Allen. It's funny that Kobe said the elevator line because you and I are huge college basketball guys. And Ray Allen at UConn
Oh,
could elevate with the best of
the
them.
best of them.
And like people forget, he was in the dunk contest in the NBA. Everyone thinks about him as a shooter.
It's a credit
And
to Ray.
I feel like when he went to the Celtics, that's when he became the shooter as opposed to the slasher who would get to the hoop.
Well, it's interesting you say that. And Doc Rivers has said this to me. He said this to others. Doc always says, Ray's the one who had to sacrifice the most. And he says, I'm not sure people appreciate that, but Ray was the guy who had to sacrifice the most. He had been the man in Milwaukee, been the man in Seattle, and still was capable of doing so much more. I don't know if people remember, but like in 2009, when Garnett was out, they beat the Bulls in that first round series, and Ray's like going nuts. He had like a 50-point game because they needed more points, and he was always capable of doing that. But Ray was the guy who sort of had to sacrifice the most and just become more of a, hey, run off these screens or stand in the corner and hit these threes. And that's the part about that I don't think people fully appreciate is just how much of himself and his game Ray had to sacrifice in order to make that work. And he was willing to do it. And you look at some of these big threes that don't work, some of these scenarios that don't end up working out in the end, like when Dwight Howard was in LA and some of these other scenarios, what happened in Phoenix with Booker and Durant and Beal, and there was some injury stuff there too. But a lot of times it's just because guys aren't willing to accept the role they need to be in. And Ray Allen was. And that, as great as Garnett and Pierce were, that whole thing doesn't work and doesn't work to a championship level without Ray being able to sublimate his ego and sacrifice his stats for the good of the team.
You think about Ray Allen doing it with the Celtics, Chris Bosh with Miami, Kevin Love in Cleveland. Kevin Love, think about who Kevin Love was in Minnesota. He was top 5, top 7 players in the league, 25 and 12. And then he just goes to Cleveland and becomes a corner 3-point shooter.
Hey, you stand in the corner.
Yeah. And he sacrificed all that. I mean, he got paid for it, but he was on pace to be a world beater. So it's interesting how you say that. There is someone who has to sacrifice more than the others.
Yeah, and that's what Doc said. And Doc, I know people rip on Doc now, but I also don't think people really appreciate the job Doc did of galvanizing that team and, having to deal with the young Rajon Rondo and trying to get everybody on the same page and make sure all those guys were able to be in a position to do what's best for the team. They were a little, like you said, they were kind of, in terms of the like super team, big three type of thing, we're gonna put that together, even though people didn't necessarily think that when they put the team together. But once they saw it play, they're like, oh, okay, that was sort of uncharted territory. And Doc sort of provided the blueprint of like, this is how you get these guys to sacrifice and do it for the greater good. So I know people, obviously it hasn't gone great for Doc in Milwaukee. He's out. The Clippers, they didn't get done what they wanted to get done with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin and that team and those guys. But Doc deserves a lot of credit for what he did in 2008.
So before we kind of go on to a different segment,
Yeah.
The segment that I like to wrap up all my shows, I need to talk to you because I talk to a lot of, like you do, people, aspiring journalists, broadcasters, what have you. And I was recently speaking with someone who wanted to be a writer. And they said, that they were talking about sources and trying to be the first to a story. And I had said to them, if you have a source and you run a story because you want to be first, you are going to burn that source and you'll never have the chance to go back there. How do you, as a journalist, weigh that decision of my source versus going with a story?
Yeah, I mean, if you can't get the source if the source is telling you something off the record, you have to sort of weigh that. Now, sometimes what you can do is, take that off the record and then run it over to somebody else and sort of say, hey, I heard such and such. Is that happening? And get it another way. That happened to me one year. I think it was after Josh McDaniels left. I heard that Bill O'Brien was going to replace him as offensive coordinator. And I was able to get it that way. But if it's depending on the source and the relationship, like journalism for me, I think when you look at it, a lot of times it is ultimately a relationship business. And you have to be able to build these relationships. And do you want to be in a situation where you burn a source, you burn that person, you are in a position where you violate their trust in you, not only as a reporter, but as a human being that they can trust, just to say you had this first? Is that worth it to you at that point? I would say 9 times out of 10, it is not worth it. That is not the way that you want to go about it, because not only are you going to alienate that source, but guess what? That person's going to talk to other people and say, oh, you can't trust Chris Gasper. You can't trust so-and-so. They violated my trust. I saw it happen once. I'm not going to name. It didn't happen to me, but I was covering the Patriots. And there was a player in the middle of a year who had been named captain. And it was kind of clear that it was like an olive branch over a contract thing. And this player had told one reporter about this. And this reporter had told someone else. And that person ended up then asking this guy like a question in front of people about being named a captain and whether they thought it was real or not. And this player was irate and went to the first reporter who he had told this to and was just absolutely upbraiding this reporter. And it's like that's just like one of those things where like it wasn't, was it really worth it in that moment to show everybody you're so in the know to tell somebody else, and then it backfires on you? So you have to be careful with that. I think there probably are times that if it's such a big story that you take that risk. But 9 times out of 10, I would say do not.
It's funny.
Do it.
When you
because
said
there's always another story around the bend too. The thing you think is the biggest story of all time in whatever year, 4 years later might be nothing. It's in the dustbin, and now something else comes up, and that person won't even talk to you because you burned them.
So in that regard, why is it not 10 out of 10?
Because I would say there's probably certain stories where it might be worth it to do it. For example, if there's some sort of malfeasance, or if it's like something that has to do with
layman's terms, Gasper. Okay, we're not all on your. I mean, like
somebody, if it's a situation where somebody's mishandling money in an organization or doing something untoward, like in an organization that the public really needs to know about, and that it's sort of a greater good thing. Like at the end of the day, is the greater good of burning the source to you and your career or to the public? That's why it's 9 out of 10, because there's that one time where the greater good might actually be to the public. And then you can justify it that way. But if the greater good is to you and your career, and look, there's people who've done it and gotten away with it and honestly built careers on it, but that's just not the way that I would roll, because I think it kind of catches up to you eventually.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And in case you're now wondering why I knew Gasper would be a rock star, you just heard it. I mean, the language that he's been using throughout this podcast.
I'm trying to tone it down, man.
I've had to like Google as we're doing this. I mean, I got to read the dictionary when I talk to you, and it's ridiculous because for those of you who are just finding out, I mean, we are over an hour into this conversation, and this is what typically happens with me and Gasper. Like, I'll be in the car and we'll have like a 3-hour conversation, and it's like, all right, let's take some calls.
Yeah. My wife a
So
lot of times would be like, "Where were you? Like, you said you'd be home at this time." I was like, "Oh, I was in the parking lot talking to Justin." She's like, "For an hour?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then she'll be like, "Yeah, that tracks."
yeah, here, look at my phone.
Yeah.
Wait, but you were on the phone with them for 2.5 hours. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it was only an hour in the parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I like to end all my podcasts with a segment I call This Just In. And it's rapid fire questions
All right.
that you can take as much time as you want to
Okay.
answer.
Okay.
And I reserve the right to ask a follow up.
Love it.
Your favorite athlete to cover?
Oh, favorite athlete to cover. Oh, that's so hard. Favorite athlete to cover. Based on like, I'll tell you an athlete. So I actually loved, obviously covering Brady was incredible. I mean, just the stuff that he did. And he's just a very, it's hard for people to believe, but just like a very down to earth guy. Definitely raised the right way by his family, would always look you right in the eye. You know, Ray Allen's obviously up there too, but I'm going to say Steven Gostowski, the kicker for the Patriots. Steven is just great. We used to have these conversations about things, hey, what's the best way to get a home mortgage? We would have conversations about like, hey, I'll be honest with you. I'm a little bit of a geek. So we'd have conversations about Star Wars and like Marvel stuff. I loved covering Steven Gostowski. He was just such a regular guy and such a great guy. I would say Gerard Mayo too. Obviously it didn't work out for Gerard as a
Right.
coach, but being able to, cover him when he was a player. I'll tell like, I know it's supposed to be rapid fire, but I'll tell
No.
two quick
This is for
stories
you to,
about Gerard. So his
please.
rookie year, I went down to Virginia to talk to his family and everything and do, the big first round draft pick piece. And that was great. I really, went down there, met his mom, Denise, and, and Wilson, his stepdad. And it was really a good time. But he had to fly back for the press conference. And we ended up being on like the same flight back. So he was literally texting me like, "Chris, what time's our flight? What airline?" So it wasn't a direct flight. We got to LaGuardia and he had to change into his suit for the press conference. And so he's like, "Hey, can you watch my stuff while I go change?" I was like, "No problem, Gerard." Like, it was good. And when he became the head coach, he said, I can't remember exactly what he said. He became the coach and I asked him a question. He goes, "Chris, can you believe we've known each other since 2009? And yeah, this was like 2008. Sorry, 2008. We've known each other since 2008. And this was 24. He goes, "Our relationship is old enough to drive." And I was like, "Yeah, it's true." And then I'll tell another part of this. We were 2009. We're in Denver. Josh McDaniels is the coach. The Patriots end up losing this game to McDaniels and the Broncos. And Brandon Merriweather, who I also love covering, committed a bad penalty at the end of the game. And so I go in the locker room and I'm trying to ask Brandon about it. And there's another guy, Brandon McGowan, there. And they're kind of laughing. And I'm trying to ask Brandon these questions and he's not turning around and looking at me, Merriweather. And so finally I was like, "Brandon, like, if you don't want to answer the question, that's cool. But like, don't disrespect me. Like, don't disrespect me. Like, what's going on? What are you laughing at? Like, don't disrespect me." And McGowan goes, "Ain't nobody disrespecting you, bro, yet." And like sort of starts staring me down. So like, I'm in trouble now, but I'm like, I can't back down. If I back down,
Right.
these guys will never respect me. So I'm just like still there. And I'm like, "Hey man, I'm just trying to do my job." And Gerard over like one locker over in the corner goes, "Hey, cool it. Gerard Mayo may have saved my life that day because Brandon McGowan was ready to beat my ass. That would not have gone well for me. So I'm, so Gerard's definitely one of my favorites. Yeah.
Okay. I always say this, being a broadcaster, if I say something on the air that is controversial, I will be at the team's practice the next day so that they can approach me if there's an issue. You being a beat writer or a columnist, you're going to ruffle feathers, especially as a columnist. So what has been the experience that you wrote something and that you were confronted about it in the locker room of the clubhouse?
Yes, I'll give you one. It's Bill Belichick. I wasn't even a columnist yet. I was on the No, I wasn't even on. I was on the beat, but I was the backup. So 2006, the height of sort of Eric Mangini is on Sopranos and stuff. Uh, Bill didn't really want Mangini to take the job because he holds some animus towards hatred towards the Jets. Sort of rightfully so for the way Steve Gutman painted him when he left. This is a man in turmoil and all this other stuff. So I go and I write this story on Mangini from the Jets, who were then in Hempstead, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And, honestly, this was a mistake by me. I was very young in my career at that point. I had covered Bill all year. I knew how he felt about the Jets. I knew he didn't like the Mangini. This is when they weren't doing the handshakes. But it was my fault. I should have at least given him the opportunity to answer, questions. And I didn't. And so he read the story. And I come back to Foxborough. He obviously had read the story. We do the press conference. He's looking at me weird. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? He walks out, and the PR guy, Stacey James, comes out and says, Chris, coach would like to see you, like a player, like I'm getting cut.
Yeah.
And they bring me into this side room, and Bill looks at me and goes, if you think I'm a shitty coach, just write I'm a shitty coach. Yeah. Yep. And he's like, just write that, just fucking write I'm a shitty coach if that's what you, and I'm saying, Bill, I don't think you're a shitty coach. And he's like, well, this Mangini story, you're acting like I didn't have anything to do with this guy's career and you didn't contact me on this. And, he had a point. Now I said to him, I said, okay, Bill, I understand where you're coming from. I want to make sure this never happens again. Let's, let me get your number. To which he was like, if you need anything, just call Bears, which was like his PR guy. So I kind of called his bluff on it, but still it was, he had a valid point there but it's like, now I knew what it felt like to be a player. Cause he's just MFing, F-bombing me, the story, whatever. And so, yeah, that was my first year covering the Patriots. And yeah, he confronted me right away on that one. So yeah, lesson learned there, I think in that case, which is, look, even if you know what the person's going to say, or they're not going to say anything, or they're not even going to respond, it's going to be a no comment. You definitely have to at least give them that opportunity. So he was upset about that. And he also was sort of upset about, he felt like I didn't give him sort of enough credit. The funny thing about that, before we go to the next question, is just when I sort of came on the beat, the person I was working with already had a great relationship with Bill. And so the instructions I got from my boss was like, hey, because Bill's kind of notorious for, like, if you kind of go afoul of him, he'll turn off the stream of information. Mm-hmm. And so my boss at the time was like, hey, we have this person who has a good relationship with Bill. We need someone who's going to be
the
not
antagonist.
Hard, but more, someone who's going to be
good cop, bad cop.
Yes, exactly. Good cop. And they're like, you're the bad cop. And so that was kind of my role with that. And that's how it's, he already was a little amped up for me that year, since I was kind of, not bending the knee. But getting pulled into that little side room like a player and getting MF'd. Yeah, that was interesting.
Okay, so staying with Belichick.
Yes.
After having that experience.
Yes.
And how he's notorious in press conferences to just be stoic, monotone, not give any answers.
Yeah.
How do you work the relationship so that you can get something from him? Not in the media scrum where everyone's asking questions, but one-on-one.
So I did have a couple of one-on-one interviews with him. To be totally honest with you, most of the time I covered the team, it was good cop, bad cop. In fact, after Spygate, so, I will say this, I never played Major League Baseball, but I do have 3 career walk-offs, all courtesy of Belichick. And those are all times I was still asking him a question and he walked off the podium in the middle of my question. So I do have 3 career walk-offs to my name. One of them was Spygate, and he had said that he misinterpreted the rule. And so I had the rule and I said, Bill, excuse me, I think the rule is very clear. And I started reading the rule and he literally walked off in the middle of me reading the rule. And after that, Mike Reese, who I work with, I learned so much from Mike. Mike's one of the greatest reporters in our business and that I've ever worked with. Mike, we get in the office and Mike looks at me and he goes, we are now officially, he points to himself, good cop, points to me, bad cop. So that's kind of like how that went. I will tell a quick Belichick story though. Two things I appreciate about Bill. One, he really made you think about the way you ask questions because he's so smart. And if you asked a half-assed or lazy question, he just batted away. So he really forced you to ask better questions, which I learned a lot from him in that regard. And I really appreciate that about him, the way he forced you to really ask I remember one year I asked him, it was like Michael Vick was out there. And I really thought about, how do I want to ask Bill this question? And so instead of asking like, oh, are you interested in signing Michael Vick? What do you think of Michael Vick? I asked the question, I said, Bill, have you guys ruled out signing Michael Vick? And so Bill kind of hated to be cornered like that, ruling stuff out. And he goes, well,
Right.
We don't really rule out anything. So the next day, all the stories and all the papers were Patriots considering Michael Vick, which they really weren't. And so like 2 days later or something, Mike Shanahan comes to Patriots training camp. It was that same year. And I'm asking him a question about Shanahan being there. And he was still pissed about the Michael Vick question leading to all those headlines. And he walked off in the middle of the question. Yeah, I have like 3 career walk-offs with Bill. But Bill also had he's still alive. He has a great sense of humor, great dry sense of humor. And we had this discussion once in 2008 in Santa Clara. We had this dinner set up for him by the PR guy, Stacey James. And I'll never forget this. He does this dinner with all the writers. And we met with Scott Pioli, who was a vice president of player personnel. Before that, they gave us Scott. And Scott's like, hey, I hear you guys are going to dinner with Bill. Where are you going? And we're like, oh, we're going to this Mexican restaurant. He goes, ooh, Bill doesn't really like ethnic food. And so we're like, okay. So we get there, but Bill was awesome. He told like the best stories about his times with the Browns. He had us like rolling laughing. He and I had a little kind of like back and forth over soccer. He was like, who here likes soccer? And I was like, I do. And he's like, why do you like it? I said, a lot of strategy. And he goes, yeah, put the ball in the fucking net. To which I said, no. I was like, sometimes you have to give some ground to gain some ground, which he was smart enough to pick up on. He's like, okay, he's not just talking about soccer. He's talking about the media thing. It's like Bill's great. Bill's a really smart guy. And while he could be really challenging to deal with, I'm glad I got to cover him in my career because I learned a lot from it. And he's just not only so good at what he does, like as a football coach and team builder, but he's one of the smartest people I've ever come in contact with. And he really forced me to up my game.
I love that.
Yeah.
How about the best game you've ever covered?
Best game, I would have to say Super Bowl 49, just off the top of my head. I mean, that felt like, again, I'm not old, but that must have been what it felt like to cover Ali Frazier. It was just 2 heavyweights, the Seahawks and the Patriots at the height of their powers, Legion of Doom with Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas and all those guys going up against Brady when he's at the height of his powers. Russell Wilson was good. It was such a great game. The environment in the stadium, the way Brady played, they were down 10 in the fourth quarter, the way that he played. Obviously, the whole drive there, Dante Hightower tripping up Marshawn Lynch, Malcolm Butler's interception. There's other great games that I've definitely covered, but that's one that stands out. Just Super Bowl 49. It was just, I remember walking down to the locker room and thinking, oh man, I think I just witnessed the greatest Super Bowl ever played.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, the best Super Bowl party you ever attended?
The best Super Bowl party I ever attended actually has nothing to do with the Patriots. It was after the Rams beat the Bengals. There's some people on the Rams that I know, and I went with Albert Breer as well. And so we got in to that Super Bowl party, which was really, really cool. And it was a lot of fun. And also I ended up running into Jackie Bradley Jr., who was still, in baseball at that time. And I believe he was still on the Red Sox. And I remember asking him, I was like, Jackie, what do you do? He's like, it turns out Jackie Bradley Jr. is a huge Rams fan, which I didn't know. That's like his team. So getting to sort of hang out with him and talk to him, and that part of the food was really good. They had it at it was at like some airport hangar thing. And you have to remember that Super Bowl was in LA. They win it at their home stadium, and just the vibes. And there were a couple of, I'm not going to like name drop, but there were a couple like celebrities in there that were pretty cool. That was a lot of fun. And also I got to see, so Peter King was still working, and Peter King was writing his Monday Morning Quarterback off the Super Bowl while we were like at that party, which was incredible to see. Peter King's doing his thing. Bert's kind of doing his thing there. Actually, it wasn't Monday Morning Quarterback because at that point he was at NBC Sports. So whatever that thing was called that he was doing, with NBC Sports. And Peter lived in Boston for a little while. He's a huge Red Sox fan, great guy. But to get to see him, sort of what you were talking about with Jay Mariotti, to be at that party and to get to see him working and taking pieces of that party and working it into his story was really cool.
I thought you were going to say Maxim.
I've been to a number of Maxim parties, and so, I always say to my wife, and this is a true story, don't worry about me going to that Maxim party because I'm no different than the potted plant they have next to the bar. There's nobody there that's looking for me. It is the safest place I could be during a Super Bowl weekend. There's no chance of it. I might as well be, literally, I would be surprised if there were not times there that some model came in and literally threw a coat on my head thinking I was a coat rack. Because it's just, as a journalist, if you're not an athlete or a celebrity, you are invisible there. I will tell a quick story, though, about the one in Tampa. I went to the one in Tampa. This is the Steelers-Cardinals Super Bowl. And we're waiting in line. And Wes Welker, rolls up. And the woman is like, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Wes Welker." And she goes, "You're not on the list." And we're like, "What?" We're like, and he was kind of ready to just leave. And we're like, "You don't know who this guy is? This is Wes Welker. He's one of the best receivers." And Wes was so humble. He didn't do that. "This is who I am. We were sort of doing it for him. And then he ended up going in, but he could not have been any more humble. He didn't pull the "don't you know who I am" card. He was just like, "Oh, guess I'm not on the list."
That's actually really cool.
And I will say I ran into Antonio Pierce at that one, and that's all I can say about that. I'm not going to...
Were you wearing black? No.
No, he wasn't wearing black. No, I ran into Antonio Pierce, and then we later ran into Asante Samuel at the Seminole Hard Rock Casino. Yeah, I can't really say much more.
Fair enough.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. How about the column that you're most proud of?
Oh, I'm really hard on myself, man. So it's hard. That's such a tough question. The column I'm most proud of. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head. I'm one of those people, I always go back and look at it and think that could have been a little bit better. A word here, a word there, a different lead. What about this? What about that?
Okay, how about, I'll rephrase the question since you're going Bill Belichick on me.
Yeah.
The column that you wrote and you said to yourself, "I can't believe I get to write a column about this."
That one's tough too. I will say, so this is childhood me. This is, I would say when I got to cover, because I haven't covered a ton of baseball. I covered World Series and stuff, but I was never a Red Sox beat writer. So when I came back to the Globe in 2021, was it? Yeah, I think it was 2021. I got to do the All-Star game in LA with the Dodgers, and I got to go down in the field afterwards. And I remember thinking oh man, 11-year-old Chris would think this is the coolest thing ever. I'm at Dodger Stadium. I got to cover the All-Star game. I used to, as a kid, live for the All-Star game. I still remember Bo Jackson, Wade Boggs, back-to-back home runs. Back-to-back home runs at Anaheim Stadium, 1989. That type of stuff. So that's the one where I was like, oh, I can't believe I get to write a column off the All-Star game. And that was even just the day before with the media stuff at Dodger Stadium, getting to talk to, Mookie again and some of the players. That was one of those pinch me moments. Like I said, being out on the field afterwards. I wasn't that far away from where Fox was doing the post-game show with Ortiz and all those guys. And I just remember thinking 11-year-old Chris would never believe that we're doing this,
All right. 11-year-old Chris.
Yeah.
Who's his favorite athlete?
Ellis Burks.
No hesitation.
All-time favorite baseball player. That was my guy. When you're young and you're into sports, Ellis Burks was my guy. He was a big prospect coming up in the Red Sox organization. I think a lot of people know the history of the Red Sox organization with race, right? So I didn't see a lot of people on the Red Sox team that, kind of looked like me. And going to the stadium in those days was a little different. The fan base wasn't as diverse. And I just kind of and he was a different type of player the Red Sox hadn't necessarily had. Obviously we had Jim Rice, who was fantastic, Hall of Famer. But Jim Rice at that point in his career where I was watching the team was more of a slugger, right? And Ellis Burks, here's this guy. He's fast. He can run. He's 2020 guy, which used to mean something back in the day. Now
Now you're 2020 by the All-Star break.
yeah. I mean, now you get Acuna with 40 homers and 70 stolen bases. And that's why Acuna is one of my favorite baseball players. But yeah, Ellis Burks was my guy. That was absolutely my guy. And to the point that when he left the team and he came back with the White Sox that next year, I asked my dad to get tickets and we went, and my poor brother got a peanut allergy during the game. And I refused to leave though. I made my brother sit through the game with the peanut allergy because it was Ellis Burks and there was a rain delay. There was like a 90-minute rain delay. And so everybody left. My dad had gotten the seats by the pesky pole because Ellis played right field for the White Sox. So we could be as close to him as possible. We were like in the first row. And so the rain delay. So my dad's like, oh, this is great. Rain delay. Everyone's gone. Do you want to sit behind home plate? And I'm like, no, we're sitting in these seats in right field by Ellis Burks.
So your sister hates you because you made her watch sports. Your brother hates you because he almost died with a peanut allergy.
It wasn't that bad. Steven was going to live. He was going to leave. He had hives or whatever.
Yeah, you're like, suck it up. It's Ellis Burks.
Pretty much. That was my thing. I was like, we're not leaving. Like, I don't know when this guy's going to be back. And we're right there. So yeah, Ellis Burks, my all-time favorite.
All right. I'll end it, I think, on this.
Okay.
You've covered the NBA Finals.
Yes.
I believe you've covered a Stanley Cup final.
I have, yep. Multiple, yep.
World Series,
mm-hmm.
and a Super Bowl.
Yep. Final Four, yep.
Okay. What's the best?
Out of those or best anything I've ever covered?
Out of those, and if it's not those, anything you've ever covered.
All right. Okay. So out of those, so we're saying out of the major 4 sports championships.
Major 4 sports championships include the Final Four, and if you've done a FBS national championship.
I've done that too. I would say out of all of those, Super Bowls are really cool. I maybe am a little jaundiced because I've covered, I think, 12 now. So I will say the Final Four. I don't cover that anymore. I really miss it. I loved covering the Final Four. I love college basketball. The Final Four is the best of those. The Olympics is great. I got to cover Summer Olympics. That was really cool. I think the thing about the Olympics, it's not just, sometimes when you're doing this job, you can get caught up in the analytics and the stats. The Olympics reminds you that journalism in general, sports or otherwise, is about telling people's stories. Mm-hmm. It's about telling their story. And so the Olympics, that was really cool. But my all-time favorite thing that I've covered is the Little League World Series. That's my favorite.
Why?
It is.
I mean, I've done the lead up to it, and I told the kids I would trade places with you right now. Like, I'm going to broadcast this game for ESPN. I'd rather be you.
Yeah.
Because 11, 12-year-old me, that was my dream to go to Williamsport. So why is the Little League World Series your favorite?
It's just so pure. And I had a team from Portsmouth, New Hampshire that I covered that I got to go with. And it's like Peter Pan, it's like Never Neverland for sports fans. And you just feel it's just so pure in terms of sport. And it reminds you why you love sports in the first place. And you see kids from all over the world interacting, and they have this common bond through baseball. And the fans kind of have a common bond through baseball. Williamsport is this place that takes you back to a simpler time. I loved it. I loved every second of it. And selfishly, as a journalist, the other reason I like it, and this is what I tell a lot of young reporters, because I spent a lot of time covering youth sports and high school sports before I was doing college and the pros. I say, hey, treasure that while you can, because the thing about that level of sports, they want to talk to you. Mm-hmm. They're excited to talk to you. As you move up, you realize they're like, oh, shit, I got to talk to this guy or this woman. Yeah. Like they don't want to talk to you, right? And so the fact that those kids were so excited that a journalist was there, they were so open about it. They were enjoying the time that they had in the dorms, and just the baseball part of it. It felt like Field of Dreams for me. I really love that experience, and I only got to do it once, but I would definitely do it again, because it's just so pure in terms of sport and why people fall in love with it.
Did you slide down the hill?
I did not slide down the hill. Yes, I should have. I did not. That was a time in my career where I was, again, that was 2006. That was right before I got promoted. So right. I was like really on my grind. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I got promoted to the Globe Sports Department, I remember where I was. I was in a parking garage in downtown Williamsport, Pennsylvania, because I was hustling, trying to do a story that had nothing to do with sports, that was basically like on Williamsport. It was like a news story on Williamsport and economically what the Little League World Series means to them, because I was, hustling so hard. I mean, there was a point, that was like a point in my career where I wasn't sure it was going to happen for me. And I was like, this is my final push. And if it doesn't happen, I'm going to walk away and go to law school or do something else. So I was just so focused and so on my grind that I didn't, but I do still have, there was a bar there. I can't remember the name of it, but I do still have one of the coasters from that bar that I took in Williamsport. It's like something frog or something. And I still have that coaster.
I love that. All right. So you mentioned dorms.
Yeah.
I guess I lied. I have
Okay.
to bring it back. We got to go full circle.
Okay.
Simpler times, you and me at BU.
I really have to censor. I'm self-censoring so hard when it comes to our time at BU and you, because I don't want to bury you. So I'm self-censoring so hard.
There are only so many people who can bury me. Okay. Just know that, like, I was in your wedding, you were in my wedding, but you can still say stuff. It's okay.
Okay.
Did you think we'd ever be here?
Oh, I knew you'd be here. Yeah, for sure. You? Yeah. And I'm not just saying, like, 1,000%. I knew you would be here. Myself, I wasn't sure. I just wasn't, because I never had like the level. The thing I've always admired about you is your confidence. And what I noticed when we were at BU is that you, as a former athlete, can like relate to the athletes on their level. Like they respect you almost as one of their peers. You can kind of speak their language. And that's not something that's natural for me. Like I said, I'm more, I think, bookish, to be honest with you.
Articulate?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I think I'm like a little bit more bookish and reserved in that regard. I'm not as outgoing as you are. So I knew for sure that you would. I mean, when we were in college, you were doing stuff at like Celtics games and had like hookups at Fox. For me, it was a longer road. And I always have to thank Michael Smith, who worked at the Globe and worked at ESPN, because I remember early in my career, I was covering all that high school stuff and youth stuff. And I'm like, and Michael Smith and I were the same age. And I'm looking at him, he's covering the Patriots. He's on like Around the Horn. Eventually he goes to ESPN. And I'm like, man, like if that's what's going on, like I'm dead in the water. And I remember talking to Michael about it. And he said, everybody has a different path and it happens for everybody on the timeline it's supposed to happen. And he was so gracious about it. And that was such great advice. And I still pass that advice on to people now. I mean, I got promoted to the Globe Sports Department at age 26. But like my feeling at that time was like, I'm behind. There were people like the late, great Chris Snow and Michael Smith who like, boom, like right out of college were covering stuff. And I just remember thinking like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to this point or I'm ever going to make it. And, so yeah, for you, yes. Me, I wanted it. I always wanted it, but I wasn't sure I was going to get there. I really wasn't.
I knew you were. Like I said before,
thanks.
When you said player versus playa, there was no doubt in my mind. And it's really, it's tough. It's almost emotional, but it's really cool to think about where we were at WTBU doing these shows. And then I think my last year with the Wizards, we were up in Boston and you and I got a picture
at
Center Court. I still have that, like to see like that transition. And we obviously still look the same. So,
yeah, we haven't, honestly, I mean, we haven't aged. We haven't aged that much, which is good. That's, I mean, I will say, so now I am going to call you out a little bit and, but it's just funny that as we went along, and hung out, because we were both kind of young guys, skinny guys, people thought we were kind of like the AZ Fudd and Paige Beckers of like journalism. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but that was sort of the impression that people had when we would hang out. It's like, oh, this is, I was like AZ Fudd, you were like, Paige.
I've never had that comparison before, but both are great players.
They're fantastic players.
I always thought we were Pippen and Jordan, but I guess not.
No, I mean, that's what I thought. I know that's what you thought. I'm just saying when we went out, I think people thought it was It was
All right,
different.
I'll throw it back at you with this. What's
Okay.
your favorite memory from our college days?
Oh, favorite memory from our college days that I can say on this podcast? Um, I'm thinking of one right now. I think you know the one I'm thinking of, but I'm also not going to say it. You
I'm
asked me a
not sure
very
which one
specific.
you are
You asked
thinking
me a
of.
very specific question. I gave you a very specific answer.
Oh, from my 21st birthday?
Yes, but we won't go there. I knew you'd like that one.
How'd that happen?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of great memories of doing. I will say, okay, so I'll say this. I think you know I'm going to say. I think you were prompting me for this, but I would say when we were on the flag football team together at BU, we had a pretty good flag football team, and you kind of had this legendary, like Michael Vick, like 75. You were from quarterback because you play quarter. It's like 75-yard run, and I remember I was like behind. I saw the whole thing from behind and saw you weave through all these people. And that's one of my favorite memories because I remember at the time just being like, oh my God, this is an incredible play. But also being like, damn, he's not just BSing. He really is a great athlete. Because you used to always tell us what a great athlete you were. And I was like, okay, I know he played like in high school. I'm sure he's pretty good. But I was like watching him like, hey, he wasn't lying. Like, he's a great athlete.
Well, I didn't realize I talked about that. Now I feel like an asshole, but
You may
I
or may
also
not have said back then you had more natural athleticism than certain professional athletes.
Again, this is why we get along so well. We can just needle each other till
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, you used to give me crap about like, oh, Larry Bird's better than Michael
Well,
Jordan.
that's
I'm
how
like,
we met.
shut up.
So just quickly, how we met. So my first impression of you was honestly like, man, this cocky son of a gun. Because I walked into you were already saying, I walked in this WTBU meeting and there's a conversation going on. And one of the first things I hear is you saying, man, these people from Boston so overrate Larry Bird. Like they think he's like on Michael Jordan's. And like, this was like, I mean, you might as well just shot an arrow through my heart. I was like, oh. And I was like, this guy crap talking Larry Legend. Like, come on, man. And that was my first impression of you. I was like, oh no, I don't know. You're coming to Boston and you're talking about Larry Legend like that. But obviously we became really close friends. And yeah, I mean, your encyclopedic knowledge of sports and your ability to, I mean, this is a great format for you because you've always been a great, great interviewer. So I enjoy being on the show, and it's an honor to sort of be on the show because I see the caliber of people you have on who are far more interesting and accomplished than I am. And I marvel at how you get them to say the things that they say.
Well, man, I appreciate it more than you know. I appreciate you more than you know.
Thanks, man.
To say that, gosh, our friendship is over 25 years old. Again, just means that we're getting really old. But know this, Gasper. Like, I am so proud of you.
Oh, thanks,
I'm
man.
so proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm honored to say that like you were my first co-host.
Oh,
And I've talked about it in the past. I've talked about it, recently. We may have to line up to do a New York Boston podcast.
yeah.
And just go back and forth. And I think it could be a lot of fun. And we can get into all different topics. You and I have run the gamut. We've talked about race. We've talked about religion. We've talked about politics. We've talked about everything. And the best part is, no matter what, at the end of the conversation, we could say, "I love you, man."
Absolutely.
And that's
1,000%.
that's how you know you got a great friend. And plus, every time I talk to you, I feel like I have to go read a book.
I will say, like, so it's like, yeah, I know I get that's kind of my like hallmark, people, notice that sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. But I will say, yeah, obviously all of our conversations, I don't want to make it sound more important than it really is, but I will honestly say this because I feel this way. I feel like if more people in America could have the conversations, the discourse, the relationship that you and I have, because every time we have a conversation, I enjoy it so much, even if we're not coming from the same perspective. And I always think if more people could just look at it and say, wow, that's my friend. I love that person. And I just feel like I learned a lot in that conversation, even though that might not be what I believe in or I agree or I thought. But every conversation that we have, including one we had today before this podcast, I was thinking later on in the day, I was like, man, he's my guy. Like, that's just my friend. And if more people could look at people and say, that's just my friend, I think this would be a better country and a better world.
Couldn't agree more. So with that being said, we'll sign off from WTBU, and Gasper, dude, thank you for doing this. I think people are going to enjoy this one, and some great stories about Boston sports and just sports in general. Appreciate you, man. Best of luck, and can't wait to keep on reading your stuff and seeing that avatar with a beard that makes you look so old.
I appreciate it, Justin. I really do. Thanks for having me on, man. You're my guy. I always got your back. So
Right back at you. Thanks, bud.